I'm going to be working with all 4 of my markers, and as best you can, as much as you can, keep them in order, from light to dark or dark to light, whichever works better for you, because it is tricky to keep your hand on the right marker at the right time. In the light, we have the white of the paper, and we have the 10% cool gray. So I'm going to color that in. And we have the 30. Now, the rule that I follow is that I wet the paper with the lightest one, which in this case is the 10%, and just add accents of the darker one. We're rendering white objects, so we're working high key. If we were working with black objects, we would use a whole darker range of markers. Maybe 40 would be our lightest one, and then we would work up to black or the 90% marker. Now we need 30 again when we get into the halftone, so the color that would make up most of the halftone would be the 30%, and then we would just add accents of the 50. Now they've helped us out a little bit. The 50 looks like a warmer band of color, but still, I still reach for it at the wrong time, so you've got to be a little careful. Then we're using 50 again here, and we're going to use our 70 as well for accents. We'll start with the light on the top of our box, our cube, and we need our 10% and we need our 30 for accent. So I'm going to leave that white so that because light gathers at edges, and that's a definite edge there on our box. And I'm just going to swing my marker up like that so that I leave the topmost part white, because it's getting light bouncing into it. And now while that's wet, I'm going to introduce the 30. I'm just going to take a swing up, so I got a little shape there. I don't know if you can see that, but that's what I'm doing there. And now I can put my 1 away. I don't need that anymore. And I'm going to use the 3, the 30, and the 50. This is the halftone. This is the area to look at when you want to know what the true color of something is, because it's oblique to the light, but it's still in the light. So I'm going to start where I know it's going to be the halftone is the darkest, because light is bouncing off the surface and it's bouncing up in here. But at the top here, this is where the halftone is the darkest. So when you first uncap your marker, that's when the ink is just flowing fresh from the nib, and it's the darkest. Now I'm using the blended technique, so I'm moving my hand back and forth. There's keeping the paper very wet. And even in this dry, hot weather, I'm able to do it. My markers and my paper are working with me to try and get this to look as if you can't really see all the strokes I'm making. But if you do big strokes, then it's going to be very hard to wet the paper. You have to work slowly and little patches by little patches in order to get this to work. And then this is still slightly wet, so when I add the 50 at the top here, remember where it's most dark, I'll still be able to blend it in. I can use the 30 now to blend it in. The longer you stay on the paper and the more overlapping of strokes you do, the darker the marker will appear. So, but they dry lighter. They dry a lot lighter than when they first went down. Now, I don't like this angle. I think it should be this way, because remember that our side should look that should look smaller than the part that's closer to us. Now we're using a darker set of markers here, but following the same idea that it's darker at the top and lighter at the bottom because the light is bouncing off the surface that it's sitting on. So I'm going to start with the 50, leave my key line of white because light gathers at edges, and I'm going to fill it in back and forth and back and forth, not in big arcing strokes, but just little bits at a time. If you want it to blend, that's how you do it, so that the markers and the paper do the work. This is a very high quality marker and pen, so this is my 70. Marker and paper, this is very high quality markers and paper, so they do a lot of the work for you. There's my 70 accent, and I'm going to blend with the 50. So if I had to say two things that make this frustrating for people using the markers for the first time, it would be two things. They don't stay on the paper long enough to get the paper wet, and they use too much of the dark accent and not enough of the light one that does all the blending and all the wetting of the paper. So in the light case, they don't use enough 10, and in the halftone they don't use enough 30 before they introduce the 50, and in the shadow they don't use enough 50 before they add the 70. We have to make a bit of a halftone at the top here, because the sphere is rolling away from us. So we don't want to put too much contrast back there. We want to bring the halftone round. But you start your halftone here, because that's the darkest that the halftone will ever be, before it goes lighter at the top. We'll start with our 10, add some of our 30, and then we have to introduce the 50 and a bit of the 70. So not in separate planes like this, but all together all at once. So get them lined up in your hand and uncapped. Try to get the caps back on the right markers every time, because they do change the nibs if you don't. The colors will change. So get them in the right order, especially that 50, which seems to want to be working all the time. It has to not be such a show-off. I'm thinking I'll do a phantom curve before I begin so that my hand knows where to go. And I'm going to start down here so that I can start making that curve and make adjustments to it. And rather than stop, I can go inside though. It looks a little kind of more casual. We don't want too large a white spot there, but it is a white object. So every time I do this, it turns out differently, and it will for you too. So there's the one. I'm going to cap it so it doesn't get too dry. It's the one that's going to dry out the fastest, so take good care of it. Try not to let it get too dry before in the air. Now this 3, it has to come inside the 1. You'll notice that I took the 1 all the way to the edge of the shape. I used it to wet the paper for the 3. Now the 3 is a big, massive area, but that's okay. If I don't like some of what's going on here at the top of it, I can re-wet it with the 1, and that'll soften it some more. the 10. Oh, I hope you can forgive me. They change the brands of markers up every time in the kit. So sometimes they're doing it by percentages, and so I can't keep up. So hopefully you can translate what I'm saying if I make a mistake. Now here I'm bringing the 50 all the way down to the edge, and I'm going to take the 70 and put it inside because I'm getting the same reflected light that I have on my other geometric shapes. I'm getting that, and I'm going to blend that to the edge, not with the 50 but the 30. The 50 would make this, if I kept using it, it would make it very dark, and I want to get the reflected light represented. So there we go. We can tackle the shadow for the cube, and for that you can use your 50 and your 70 or your 5 or your 7, whichever markers we're using at this time. I'm going to wet it with the 5. Remember to bring your hand back and forth and back and forth. These nibs are phenomenal. They have many different edges to them. So I'm using the frontmost edge this time to make my way through this shape, and this shadow is darkest right under the shape. So that's the absence of light right there. Very dark. And this is actually quite dark too, because there's always a little shadow underneath. I'm going to leave that. I was going to blend it with my 50, but I don't mind those shapes too much. Oh, this is so hard not to tinker. But you can see, you can just soften that a little bit. But the paper and the markers probably would have done it for me. Now, here I'm going to wet that with my 50, and remember it's going to be a little dark underneath, and I'm going to fill it in with the 50 and add the 70 right underneath inside here. And if I want to soften that a little bit, I can, till I get a shape that looks... Now, when I say a shape that looks good, I mean a shape that's not going to draw attention to itself. Because we don't want to look in the shadow, we want to look at our forms. So, that's the idea there. Now, for our cone, we need all of our markers open again, because, now see how much ink is bleeding through. That's normal. It's supposed to do that. We're going to leave all our markers open again for this rendition, because we need to be able to blend them together as we go while the paper's wet. But when you don't need them, cap them up. When we don't need to use them all at once, cap them up. So, now this is interesting, you see. This now is clipping the edge of my cone, so it's going to go up the side of my cylinder, the cone shadow. It's going to clip it and go up the edge a little bit. Because it's on an angle though, it'll stop pretty soon. But that's something to note. So I'm using my 10, and I'm going to try to use the skinny edge of my nib. I want to maintain a highlight now at the tip. Better now at this time to come from the bottom up. Sorry, I live in a loud neighborhood in downtown Toronto, so you're just going to hear just about everything. So that's going to be our light side of our cone. Now I'm going to start working from this edge forward. And I discovered, see, this is about discovery. We're sketching, we're freehanding, we're sketching. So I discovered that I can get a better shape by working from the bottom up. But you'll have to see yourself what works better for you. There's my 1, and I'm working my way over to the light at the white of the paper. And there's my 3, which is going to start from the edge here as well. And there's still some white there. The white is very pale. And now I've got to introduce my 5, my 50. So I've got to do that carefully and really watch my shape. And to blend it in, I could put some 30 over it. Don't like that little white thing. And then now it comes, hold your breath, time for the 70. Now if you want to blend that in, you wouldn't use your 50, you would use your 30. If I use my 50 now, it would make the whole shadow much too dark and I wouldn't see my reflected light. Let's try it anyway and I'll show you. Oh, it's not so bad. I guess my paper is really wet, but if your paper had a chance to really dry, the 50 would have been a little too dark. This I might make a little darker. That's a little too white. We don't want anything white on this side because that's our shadow, true shadow. This cylinder, we have to keep them all open again because we've got to keep them blending. So I'm going to go up and down, and you don't go big swatches. You keep it close. Now I can start to ease up because I want to make my way over to the white of the paper. So you ease up. And I'm going to introduce the 30 inside there. And you try to keep it straight. I got a wobbler there. It's not very straight. But if it's still wet, I might be able to retrieve it. And I'll go with the 1 again just to blend that in a bit. And I'm going to try to straighten this out a little bit. Okay, now that's all over there. We've got our white of our paper, our 10 and our 30. White of the paper, 10 and 30. And over here I'm going to go with the 10 again because I want to make a smooth transition over from the shadow side out into the light. There. And I'll introduce the 30. I'm going to cap that 1 because it's the one, as I told you, is going to dry out the fastest. And this is my 30. You're always checking because it's so easy to pick up the wrong one. And I don't want it to be too light over there. If it's too light, it won't look like shadow. There. And I'll put in the 50 now inside. And I can blend that with more 30. And I don't think this is going to transition very nicely, so I'm going to go back with more 1. My 1 is drying out a little bit, so it's not helping the 30 as much as it. Because the only problem, if you get one you don't like, the problem is going to be that the value contrast is not, see, that value contrast is too strong. So if I take my 30 and lower the value on either side of that stripe, it sets back in space a little better. So I am blending it a little bit, but more than that, I'm decreasing the value on either side of it so that that value fits in. It fits in better in the sequence of values. All right, now we do need our 1 again and our 3, but I'm just going to let my marker rest a bit. If you don't hear a click, you're not getting the marker's cap on tight enough. So you've got to hear a click. You know what we could do is put our shadows in here. This is our 70 again and our 50. I'm going to use my 70 out here so that I get a nice... There. Okay. May as well jazz this up as well if we're going to do it. Kind of gives them a little motion. Now we'll start with our 50. This I can't see, so I'm going to put this in so I can see it because it clipped the side there. See? Dark to light. Now we're going dark to light again, but we're putting on our 50. And we have to put the 70 in as well, because that's the absence of light over here. That's what a cast shadow is the absence of light. And if I put the 70 here and that shadow on top of the cylinder is a little lighter than the 70, it will look good, because it'll be another occasion to see dark to light. Now you can go over your border, you don't have to stop there. Remember, the cylinder shadow is round at the edge, so this is, and these shadows get very soft and very light as they move away from the object, the complete absence of light, because you're going to, the light is going to start hitting the shadow. So I blend that in with a little bit of my 5. To check to see whether it's working or not, you just go back and you ask, is everything in the shadow darker than the halftone? And is everything in the halftone darker than the light part? Darker, halftone, and light. Shadow, light, halftone. Shadow, light, halftone. So that's that. And they are white objects. So, oh, we forgot the light. So we have to leave that little key line. So we need our 1 and our 30, our 10 and our 30, pardon me. And you are going to get a little messy, so that's okay. It washes off. And see, you just kind of make a little shape up here. There. And you put in your accent of 30, but it's mostly the white of the paper. And that's a place where we could touch it up with some of your white pens, your white gel pen or your other white pen. And you check your outlines. I'm going to put a background to set these up. And as you see, you start back and forth, but then you go lightly. You just go lightly to transition into the white of the paper. Instead of switching to a new marker, you can just ease up on the weight of your hand, and you can get with a dark marker you can do that. The light markers you can't see that, but okay. So I'm going to go back and forth and back and forth, and then back and forth and back and forth, and then I ease up, put a dot. That gives it a little pizzazz. This is the 70. that was a mistake in there. I started doing little pecky strokes, and this one is all about broad sweeping strokes. So you've got to think about your strokes when you're using a marker. You have to have an intention. But this is about discovery, not about how perfect it is. The weight is heavier over there, so I'm just going to add a little more to this side to get some weight to it.